Hello and welcome to the Speak Life LIVEcast. My name is Glen Scrivener, and joining me in Crowborough is Paul Feasy. Hello, Paul.
Hello, how are you doing?
What accent was that? That's how are you doing? It almost sounded
Yeah,
Australian.
I was,
How's it going?
I was going to say something else, and I got confused in the middle of a sentence.
I was
got
in
stuck.
between diction, and that is the Australian accent. Yeah. Yes, we are talking today about church out of the box, because we are noticing what everybody's noticing in these conditions, that showing up on a Sunday morning, there are wonderful things about it, and we find it oh so precious to be with the saints. But our buildings have to, by law, feel incredibly empty. We have to be masked. We can't sing. There are all sorts of regulations on our times together that mean that Sunday mornings are times of joy because we're with God's people, and times of frustration. So, what do we do about that? And perhaps there are ways of thinking out of the box. And we'll, in this episode, be talking to Susie Leafe, who is the Director of Operations at GAFCON UK, and to Michael Otts, an evangelist who was recently on the LIVEcast, who both have some wild and crazy ideas about how we can think of church outside the box. But Paul, what's been your experience of church as we've transitioned from kind of the Zoom church thing to the live church thing? What's been your experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my experience. We've been back in church for 3 weeks or so on a Sunday morning, and it's been okay. It's been nice to be back in the building. Nice to kind of see people a little bit, but it's obviously not the same as it was.
Mhm.
And I think the thing I'm noticing still off the back of it is quite a lot of loss of the fellowship aspect. I think more than anything, feels like we're not. It still feels like I'm not really having much fellowship with other people. Maybe even less than we were before.
Right. So the service ends, and obviously you're not milling around inside the church building. But are there places where you can congregate and speak together outside the building?
Yeah, so we've got there's a green outside the church, and at least one of the weeks we kind of spilled out and chatted afterwards. And that didn't really happen this week, at least at the service I was at so much. So I mean, there is space, which is good whilst the weather holds. But I mean, I think the thing I'm noticing as well is that there's a lot of people who just aren't there, and that could be for different reasons. You can't physically fit them in, or maybe they can't come. Maybe it's shielding, or there's particular reasons they can't be there. So it still feels like, in a sense, we're not quite back together. So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle, and that's not at all a knock on what the church are doing. So, the church are doing a great job, but obviously they're limited by what they can do. Yep. The constraints that are put on them by the government and the Church of England itself as well means you have certain restrictions in place that makes it tricky. So I think it is nice to be back, but I'm certainly sitting in there feeling like it's. I still feel like I'm missing something here. Like we're not really back in the midst of it again yet.
No, right. I put on Twitter, it feels so anemic on a Sunday morning. What should we do, friends? And Esther O'Reilly, who's also been on the show before, she tweeted back one word: rebel. Which I responded, Americans, that's your answer to everything. Don't tread on me, man. Rebel. and like I totally get that as an instinctive like response, and I think another response that would be sort of stereotypically British would be just make do. Make do. Okay, it's not the best, kind of thing, but let's
Sure.
just make our peace with it and make do.
Mm.
And I want to figure out, is there a third way? Is
Mm.
that's not just rebelling against the law, because I mean we've spoken before about people who have taken the view that this is a Romans 13. This is a moment of kind of exception to Romans 13, where we must
Hmm.
obey God and not man, and whatever the law says, we will meet. And I sort of explained in that episode, I don't think that's the case right now. Certainly not in the UK. I don't think the regulations that are being applied to the church um, are specifically anti-Christian. I don't think they are trying to crush Christian faith in this country through this legislation. I'm always a fan of that maxim that says, don't attribute to malevolence anything that could be better explained by incompetence. So when you look at government stipulations for things, I'm far more likely to see just a mess. And I don't attribute the specific regulations that have been given to churches as anti-Christian.
Mm.
It would be nice if
Just
they trust
incompetent.
just incompetent. It's- yeah, which
I
is
think
fine.
there'd be a number of people who would be able to get on board with that. So.
Yeah, I think so. I'm building a coalition. Just find a common enemy, and a great way. I mean,
Hurl the mud.
yeah. But most specifically, it would be nice to be trusted as much as Tesco's is trusted. It would be nice to be trusted as much as pubs were trusted. That would be nice. And
Mm.
I think we should legally be making challenges to say, hang on, if pubs are allowed to do X, why are churches not allowed to do X?
Yeah,
Totally
particularly
agree with
when
that.
you consider that. I mean, pubs basically their job, their money. They get their money from helping you lose your inhibitions. Which is probably not the thing you. It'll be fine though. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, a guy on Twitter just tweeted me this morning. Said it was galling to go out to the pub with his wife the other night, and like everyone was singing in the pub, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we can't do it on a Sunday morning. So I understand the instinct to rebel, but like for me, I don't think we're at that stage. Um, I
Mm.
also don't want to go down the route of just making do, because I think something quite dangerous is happening, and I think
Hmm.
it's slipping away from us if we're not careful. And I don't think we can make do. I think we need to innovate. If there was a one
Yeah.
word response,
Yeah.
think outside the
I think
box.
that's the thing. That's the thing that's kind of for me, not just in church, but actually all of life. In the last 2 weeks or so, I've just kind of come to the realization. It slowly dawned that um, people. I hate the phrase "the new normal," but it is what it is. It's being used,
At
and
unprecedented levels.
unprecedented levels.
Yes.
Apart from the last time we had a
Yes,
plague,
yes.
but the idea really the thing that's been dawning on me is that we've been in this for 5 months, and we could be in it. Who knows? Another 5 months. Who knows how long it's going to go on? And a lot of the stuff that I've been doing in my own life, or the things we've been doing in terms of church, there's a sense in which it's been, well, we can do this because it's just for this season, and then this will pass. The question is, at what point does it become such a long season that just kind of, like you say, making do and not quite doing things the way you would do? When does that become a problem? So if we're in this for another 5 months, do we just want to do what we're doing in church now for another 5 months? Or do we need to think differently about church? Because it isn't the same. It can't be. And as we've been kind of chatting about this a little bit, my concern is if this is what we do in church for the next 5 months or longer, in a sense, I'm not too worried about what Sunday looks like. I'm just more concerned about the fact we're not really having fellowship with other Christians. There's going to be lots of people who are in danger of drifting away because of the way church is at the moment. People who are not fringe people who are just kind of, who are maybe quite regular churchgoers. I suppose what this season has done for us, or shown us, or the position it's put us in as Christians, is we've all got to take, in a sense, a greater personal responsibility for our own walk. And so I guess in terms of that responsibility thing, my experience has been, as someone, I think, I'm quite plugged in to church, relatively switched on. I'm sitting at home thinking, about non-Christians and stuff, and how we do church, and how we're part of the team for this congregation. How do we make that work? I work at Speak Life, Even in that position, I would say I've found these last 5 months really, really hard to keep going as a Christian. And I think, well, if that's my experience as someone who's been quite heavily involved, or is heavily involved in church, there's going to be lots of people who just don't have that. And my concern is, how are people being discipled through this time? So we can watch something on a Sunday on a screen, or turn up and kind of get this kind of slightly anemic version of church. But my concern is that those people who are, like I say, not fringe members necessarily, but more casual, will just kind of gradually drift. That going to church has been a habit, maybe. Not saying they don't believe, that they're not real believers, but church is very habitual. And now we get into the habit of not being in church and gradually drifting away. And so how do we do that? And then also I was thinking about evangelism, so much as I was sitting in church on Sunday, I was thinking so much of what we do in terms of evangelism is about, like, we're going to run this course, invite someone to this course, or invite them to church. And, like, you can still do some courses. I know people have been running a few things and there's been success there. But the whole thing is just a lot trickier, isn't it? That the idea of inviting someone to church at the moment is just... It seems like a logistical nightmare. I've got a book online for my family, and then if someone else wants to come, you want to say, well, can they come? But they can't. I'm not sure they can sit with us, and all these kind of things. And I think my concern is that the phrase I've been thinking about is it feels a bit like the church, and I mean the wider church here, is slightly hamstrung. Like, this has caught us out a bit. Like, now we can't get together. We've kind of gone, well, how do we actually do this? How do we disciple people? How are we supposed to do evangelism if we can't bring people to the church and things? And I wonder if we've just been caught out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's revealed to us that actually Zoom is not a substitute for gathering. And Hebrews 12 talks about, you come to Mount Zion, and it gives this very spiritual, idea that, you come to angels upon angels, and that church, I'm on Mount Zion, even as I'm at All Souls Eastbourne. So you could, and I've actually used Hebrews 12 a couple of times when I've preached online during lockdown, and I've kind of said, look, we are kind of together, even though we're not together physically, we are on Mount Zion together. There's this spiritual sense. But I think I've over-egged that, because before you get to Hebrews 12, you've got Hebrews 10. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And what's interesting there is, it's a habit to go to church, and it's a habit to not go to church. It's a habit to gather, and you can get into the habit of not going, of not gathering. And we're all in that habit. Let's be honest. Like, you could be a vicar, you could be a pastor of a church. You're in the habit of not gathering with God's people. How do you break that? It'll take some out of the box thinking, I think.
And I think, like, so you'd posted on Facebook yesterday asking for people. You'd posted yesterday, hadn't you, kind of asking people how do we get out of this kind of anemic church type thing? How do we?
What's the answer to anemic?
Yeah, what's the
Sunday
answer to the
church?
problem? and we're going to hear from some people who've had some ideas on how to do that. But I think interestingly in the discussion, a lot of people's thing is about Sunday, is about how to make Sunday better, and a big thing seems to be about singing. So that seems to be a lot of people's issue at the moment, is around, well, we can't sing together. And I would like to sing together, but I think as well, if tomorrow the government said, yeah, you can go to church on Sunday and you can all sing, I don't think that would allay the fears and concerns I have. I mean, in one sense, I'm not that bothered about singing. My concern is the lack of real fellowship we're having, and it's for the people that are just going to drift off because they can't get into church, or they're not inclined to. And like I said, you might have. In a normal season of church, we'd have Sunday, and then you'd have house groups, and of course there'd be people in house groups and people who aren't. And those ones who aren't in house groups, you'd normally expect still to see them on a Sunday, so they're still getting picked up somehow in person, face to face. But if that's not there at all, if they're not really in church on Sunday because church isn't happening, or they're not inclined anymore, and there's not this kind of gathering in smaller groups, I just think there's a big danger that when we come back, if let's say 5 months from now, they say everything's lifted back to normal, it wouldn't surprise me if we turned up and suddenly we found that there was just loads of people who we'd thought were kind of solid-ish members, but who had just disappeared.
Yeah, just not there. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just not there.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
and that's what worries me. Like I was thinking, as I said, thinking about evangelism, thinking about the front door, but then I thought, what about the back door? And I wonder if we're going to have some big backdoor problems.
Yes.
Because of this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, your instinctive reaction is better than my instinctive reaction, because my when I think, okay, Sunday morning's not very impressive, how do we make it more impressive? Whereas you're thinking about a much more holistic kind of answer, life on life discipleship all through the week, the pastoral care of the saints, and the nurture of the flock, not just bringing them in the front door. Those are huge issues that are not going to have a single straightforward answer. But I think one thing I'll raise a banner for is, I still think the event of gathering is worth prizing and prioritizing in our life. That because the pendulum often swings, and at one end of the swing is where everything's about Sunday, and it's this massive production, and everyone's on stage, and there's smoke and lights, and it's amazing. But there's no discipleship going on. There's no pastoral care. It's all about the Sunday event. At the and that's no good. At the other end, there can be this kind of all of life is worship, so Sunday doesn't matter at all. Therefore all of life is actually discipleship, and actually at that stage you never get the sense of a day of rest. You never get the sense of meeting on Mount Zion to hear from the Lord, to be refreshed and renewed, to simply receive and be passive on the Sunday, so that you can walk down Mount Zion out into your workaday life, for the rest of the week. And so I think it's got to be both, and therefore we do need to address Sunday somehow as well.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think the way you described it was, you're kind of okay with Sunday being a breathe in, like people coming to church, and that's the moment we kind of we drink it in.
Yeah.
And that allows us to then breathe it out during the week. And I quite like that. And I don't disagree at all. I think my issue is, I think we can probably do more for Sunday. That's undoubtedly the case. So it will maybe get better. But it might not get a lot better than what it is for a long time. So if Sunday isn't going to get any better, we've got to think more about the rest of the week in some other way. If let's say, maliciously the government did turn around and say church is not allowed to meet at all. You can't do it. You can't have Sunday services. What on earth would we do? If they just said no meeting in buildings, no even, you can't even stream your service on a Sunday. Let's imagine,
Mhm.
what would we do? We'd have to think.
We'd rebel.
Well, that would be maybe the rebellion stage, yeah. But we need to find a way to try and pick people up. And I think the issue is, I mean, it's a lot of work. And if you're trying to think practically, what can you do at the moment? Well, we can begin to meet in people's houses in groups of up to 6, I think, can't you? Or
yeah.
Depending on number of households and things like that. I would love to see us move towards something like that, with still oversight from above. What we don't want is a lot of different church plants with just 6 people here, 6 people there. I think you still want to be under that one congregation. You maybe want some teaching coming from a central spot, but we want to be maybe physically in a room together if we can, praying with each other. And maybe there are those who can't come because of whatever reasons, and maybe still you have people who Zoom into your particular cell or whatever. I don't know. Maybe there's a sermon that comes centrally from somewhere that you then chat about and whatnot. But
and I think a lot of churches are moving towards that kind of thing, that on Sundays they sort of meet in houses or gardens, and many more families kind of gather together to watch the central sermon and that sort of thing. So I think churches are gravitating towards that sort of decentralized model, which sounds healthy to me. But should we have a look at something? Go on.
No, I was just going to say that if you were to be doing that, and we were trying to pick up all those people, so not just kind of like the normal people who would meet in house groups, but actively very much on top of everybody and ringing around and saying, hey, come be with us, or can you Zoom into us and stuff. I think the benefit would be that when we do finally get back to something different on a Sunday, you would find a lot of great growth that occurred anyway,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we're not doing this at all. Of course, this has been happening in many ways for years and years in house groups, but I think we need to push probably deeper into that and pick up more people in a time like this, because there's more danger of people disappearing and not coming back.
Yeah. But I think to put myself in a church leader's shoes, I think a lot of church leaders are very tired. And it's, September is meant to be the time when you've just rested well and you're raring to go into the autumn term, and actually we're moving into ever more uncertainty, and we're frazzled, and we've tried new things, and the learning curve for vicars and pastors has been immense, having to get to grips with all sorts of new technologies and things like that, and new systems, and whatever we say here is not at all meant to make any church leader pull their hair out and say, we're trying so hard. We're all trying very, very hard. Yeah.
And also, I mean, some of this discussion came off the back of an article from the Gospel Coalition, which had commented how the book The Trellis and the Vine, which is about 10 years old, had come up with this hypothetical idea of a pandemic that stopped us meeting. But one of the things they say in there to ministers is, limit how long you think about tech and stuff like that, but think about theological and pastoral issues. So make sure you don't spend your week going like, oh, how are we going to get the Zoom thing up? How are we going to get this recorded or whatnot? But actually think like pastorally and theologically, what is it that my congregation needs?
Right.
I was listening to a podcast and they were saying, like, imagine Ian, he's 26, he's a single dad. He works from 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening. How do we grow him? Or Betty, who's 80 and she's a new Christian. How do we make sure she grows? And obviously people have different people in their congregations, but thinking about those kind of things, I guess, will help us to see, if we just do this thing on a Sunday, who are we missing? And how can we help these people in our congregation that maybe wouldn't, who are going to get missed? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
it is a lot of work, but
it's a lot of work. Yeah.
It's a
and it's
vocation,
made.
isn't it? You know, like...
Well, yeah, yeah. It's a calling. Yeah, but I mean, the Sunday gathering performs so many services because you're picking up with Betty and you're picking up with, all
Mm,
the different members of your congregation. You can get around and see people, and you notice who's not there instantly. And Sunday morning actually performs a lot of those tasks of people checking in with you and you being able to check with everybody else. So yeah, being hamstrung in that area just really has knock-on effects for the whole rest of church life, really.
mm.
Should we have a look at Susie Leafe?
Yep.
Because their church has been doing something very, very interesting for the last 7 weeks. And I recorded this interview with Susie just earlier, where for just a few minutes, she explains some of the ways that they've been thinking outside the box. As we think about church outside the box, I'm joined by Susie Leafe, who's the Director of Operations for GAFCON UK and also a member of Anchor Anglican Church in Foy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Glenn. It's great to be here.
Now, our whole title for today and thinking about church outside the box has come from a series of really helpful PDFs that you have produced and a whole bunch of resources that GAFCON have released, helping church leaders to think outside the box. And in particular, one of the things you've been advocating for is meeting outside. And that's something that you've done at Anchor Anglican Church in Foy. How long have you been meeting outdoors for?
I think it's about 7 weeks now, 7 weeks. So it was the second week after we were able to. We wanted to spend, when the government guidelines changed, we had already been thinking about it, but we wanted to have a final session with everybody on Zoom to talk through with the congregation what we were going to do, what it would feel like, give people the opportunity to go up to the site that we'd be using, just so that everybody would feel comfortable, and any questions and any wisdom that they had as we set up could be brought together and everyone would feel comfortable on the day.
Terrific. And where is the site that you meet? Paint a picture for us.
So, well, we're up on the top of a cliff. It's the Foy Lankelly Rugby Club. So we use one corner of their pitch. They're not playing at the moment, but they do have a clubhouse, which they wonderfully open for us so that we can grab a cup of coffee after the service. And they have, they've got all their sort of socially distanced toilets and everything else set up in that place, which has just been brilliant. So it's a real community linking up of two groups.
Yes, yeah. So why have you taken the decision to meet physically? Doesn't Zoom provide all your needs?
Oh, well, at the beginning of lockdown, I think Zoom was brilliant. And we did a huge, again, with GAFCON UK, we were training people in using Zoom and we were great advocates for it. But after a while, that physicality, that sense of being people who are need to see each other, to be with each other, was just becoming too much. And we wanted to say, actually, let's gather, let's see what happens, let's praise God together.
Mm-hmm. And what's it been like?
Oh, it's just been a joy. It really has. I think the first week, just seeing the cars driving into the car park, people unloading with various chairs, and a bit like the first week of Zoom, where you saw people seeing each other for the first time. And there was that real just sign of recognition and joy at seeing family again. It was that sense once again of being together to worship the Lord. It was great. And it's been a really helpful way, by being outside a church building as well, and doing what we do in public, as it were. It's been a really good connection with other people. So we talk about sort of intentional integration into the community, and people walk along the lane that leads to the rugby club also leads down onto the cliffs and onto the beach. And so people are often walking their dogs along there, and a number of people have just been walking past and then just come in and stood on the touch line and watched what's going on. The other week we had a couple of boys who members of the rugby club who spent the whole service just practicing their kicks. but they could hear what was going on, and they could see that we were happy that they were doing that, and hopefully maybe something of the message will have got into their minds, and they know that church isn't a strange place to go in the future.
Right. So you're amplified, and you have musicians leading in worship, people singing along as well?
We have. So we use recorded music in our normal church, so we've just carried on doing that. So we have recorded music, amplified. We've had to get the sound right so that we're not causing a problem to our neighbours. And we are, yes, we did a full risk assessment. So before we met, our leadership team went through all of the government guidance, went to the Devon and Cornwall Police, took our guidance to them, said, is this going to be an appropriate thing to be doing? They said, yep, that's fine. And so we allow people to sing along as not too loudly.
Yes.
We're so far spaced out. I mean, there's, probably a maximum of 110, 120 in a very large rugby pitch.
Yes. Okay. And so you've done the risk assessment. You're socially distancing people. You do sort of track and trace. You're monitoring.
Yeah, we do track and trace. So as people arrive, there's someone there with a mask and with information just about how to keep safe. And they're asked if they've had any symptoms in the last 7 days. And if they say they have, then we ask them just to turn around and go away. But if they're symptom free, then we let them to come in, track and trace. There's sanitizer everywhere. It's just been a real, people have felt very safe.
Yes. Yes. Has everybody felt very safe? Because I think a lot of church leaders are discovering that there are very different approaches to risk among our people. What do you do for those who don't feel able to join you on the football pitch?
Yeah. So we've got rugby. You must get that right.
Rugby pitch. Yeah.
We'll be in a lot of trouble if we start claiming it's
the footy. Pitch. It's just the footy.
It's just the footy.
Yeah,
that's right. We have about 5 members of the congregation who, for one reason or another, are shielding themselves. And so what we have is we film the service in 2 ways. We have a Zoom we have 2 mobile phones set up. One is linked into Zoom, where members of the congregation are watching it through Zoom. And then after the service, someone is responsible for picking up the Zoom camera, and there's a chance for those people to interact with other members of the congregation who are there in the field. And then the other one is our Instagram live feed, which then gets put onto YouTube afterwards. So, and that's one anybody can watch.
Yes, and I learned from you and from some of your resources that the new word "phygital" is this hybrid of physical and digital. I'm not sure this portmanteau is going to catch on. But
it's a terrible word, isn't it? But it's a really interesting concept, this whole thing of how are we going to integrate these different ways of doing things. And one of the things, again, we'd spoken with the congregation, we knew where people were at in terms of taking risks. We knew who was going to need to shield. And so a lot of work has been done to make sure that those people still feel part of the church family, even when they can't physically gather with us at the moment.
And you would advocate for other churches around the country to do this? Because, I know that on my Facebook wall, when you wrote a comment, other people were, well, it's all well for you in Cornwall, as though it never rains. It never rains in Cornwall, does it? That's why the grass is so brown. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, we have a series of gazebos that we put up beforehand so that people, or families particularly, find gazebos helpful, families with young children, because it gives the children a sort of sense of a set of boundaries in which they can be, and they're less likely to just charge off all over the place. But it's also a shelter if it starts to rain. Everyone comes with umbrellas, all the rest of it. We've had one major downpour just as we were leading up to the sermon one Sunday. But other than that, so far, God's been kind.
And what did you do? You just put up the umbrellas and kept going?
Ran around with umbrellas and making sure that everyone was okay. People pulled on their mats. There was a sort of rustle of waterproofs. But it was fine, and we carried on. But it was only a sort of short, sharp downpour. We have a system that says that if the weather forecast is really bad, we will just go back to Zoom. So We call our vicar, he's normally known as Philip de Greywater. He's often known now as the Reverend Michael Fish, because most of the messages that come out early on in the week or later on in the week are about the weather forecast.
Okay, very good. And
yeah.
And what would it take legislation-wise for you to think it's worth meeting indoors?
Well, we don't have a building that we could socially distance in. We were already worried about the number of visitors who would be coming in the summer months and whether or not we'd be able to fit them into our building without social distancing. So for us, it wasn't a case of thinking, shall we meet indoors or outdoors? In some ways, we were forced outdoors if we wanted to meet. What we will do as the months get a little colder, we're not exactly sure. That'll be another plan. But as for people, whether everyone should be doing this, I don't think I don't think there are any fast and rules about these things. Certainly in both Wales and Scotland, I know that the legislation is somewhat different, and so it'd be very difficult for large groups to be meeting. But I think physical meeting of some kind and using our outdoor spaces in different ways, and that's what the outside the box conversations were about, not just about moving a service outside because of COVID, but actually thinking about how do we intentionally integrate our church communities where we are. So that might look like being in a park, the local park, and that might not be having a full service, but that just might be doing something as a church, which is noticeably as a church in COVID days and non-COVID days.
Brilliant. So for people who want to find out more about thinking outside the box and thinking creatively, where can they go to find out more?
I think the best place at the moment is the GAFCON UK Facebook page, or if you aren't a member, if you're not on Facebook, then if you email me, I can send you any details, and my contact details are on the GAFCON UK website.
And that is gafconuk.org, is that right?
That's right, gafconuk.org.
Terrific. Susie, Leafe, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to help anyone, no problem. Love to speak to you, Glen.
Cool. What did you make of Anchor Anglican Church in Foy?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously they have thought outside the box, getting themselves down onto the rugby pitch and stuff, and yeah, I mean it's positive. I think the thing that's really good actually is they're clearly taking steps as well to make sure they're in line with stuff. She talks about we spoke to the police and we spoke to the rugby club and whatnot. So everything they're doing, they've kind of cleared to make sure they're within the bounds of regulations, which I think is really good. And I think in this season that works well. I think it's a good thing. I think she said a few times about it. When it rains, you go around with some umbrellas and things. I'm all up for this. I'm all up for what they're doing. I think it's really good. I wonder if they'll be so up for it in January when it's not raining, but it's like -2 or something, or how many of the congregation sit down at the beginning but don't get up again at the end, So
yeah,
I understand the outside aspect there. I think it may bite a little bit later, but
yeah. I found it very refreshing, and actually one thing I thought was that because they just Instagram live their service, that takes all the pressure off making a nice production on a Sunday morning, because I know a lot of ministers over the last 5 months have been spending a lot of their time on tech, and actually this could be a way of actually saving them time, because the service is already produced. It's not polished, it's not to a high standard, but yeah. Yeah. So should we have a look at Michael Lutz as well? Because I interviewed Michael as well recently. He's had some interesting experiences preaching to live audiences out in the open air, and his church is also about to attempt something very bold and very exciting. So let's listen into my interview with Michael Lutz. We're thinking about church outside the box, and I'm with Michael Otts, who was starring in a very recent episode of the LIVEcast. So he is well known to many of you, but do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, Michael?
Yep, so I'm Michael Ox. I live in Marlow in Buckinghamshire. I work as an evangelist and normally speaking at student missions in universities around the UK and Europe.
And very recently, you had a wondrous experience, a heavenly experience of preaching to actual people in the flesh. Tell me what that was like.
Yeah, it was great. So the last time I preached to people that I could physically see standing or sitting in front of me was in March. But just a week ago, I was speaking on a camping weekend that had been organised by Oak Hall. So you may have heard of Oak Hall, the Christian holiday company. They also have a manor in Otford in Kent. And so they basically worked really hard to make a kind of COVID compliant campsites. They could cater for up to 600. We didn't have 600, but that was basically the capacity that they could run up to. It was great. People came. A lot of people came because it was literally the only Christian thing that they could go to this summer that wasn't online. And then we had main meetings where we gathered out on the garden stage. They had marked out pods kind of 2 meters apart where each kind of family unit or camping unit could sit. And I preached through some of the Old Testament prophets.
Wow.
And it was great. Like I think I was looking forward to it, but I think having spoken online for the last 6 months, and then to actually see people, even though they were a bit more kind of spread out and sometimes huddled under umbrellas, like actually being able to see people whose facial expressions change in line with what you might be saying.
Wow.
Like was just brilliant. And so I loved it. I just found it so much more energizing, engaging. And I think having had conversations with the people who were listening to the preaching, people really appreciated it as well. Like there was loads of genuine appreciation, and just they found it so spiritually refreshing just to, I think, physically kind of gather in that way helps you really engage and focus and receive in a way that is harder to do as well when you just into the computer.
Yeah, and people were performing worship from the front and just being in that environment as well with others in the great assembly.
It was very simple, really. So it was. I mean, I think this is the thing. Often when we do stuff online, we feel like it has to be like top-notch quality for people to engage, and even then, like it's hard to get people engaging. But actually, it wasn't like hugely professional in one sense. It was just a simple worship group leading in some songs that people could listen to and reflect on. I think a few people might be singing quietly and underneath their breath, and but I think just able to respond to that, and then I spoke, and people could chat and interact with it afterwards.
So you enthused about this online, and I guess what you've been trying to do, certainly in my experience of like listening to you, and we've been messaging together, and seeing your output online, is you want to light a fire under people to get them excited for physical meeting. Why do you think physical is so much superior to the Zoom meetings, however good those Zoom meetings might be?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one that when we went into lockdown, a lot of people were saying basically people aren't going to want to meet anymore. They're going to realize how much easier it is to meet online. Kind of, that's the end of the physical gathering of the church. And I think what I've realized is that actually if lockdown has taught us something, maybe it's that physically gathering is so important. And it kind of shouldn't surprise us. I was thinking, theologically, as Christians, we believe in the incarnation. We believe in a God who became flesh and dwelt among us. He didn't just send us a kind of a message or give us a Zoom chat with heaven, but he physically came to be with us. And so the incarnation should shape how we go about being church and being physically present together. It shouldn't surprise us that is infinitely better than gathering even in a kind of virtual way. So I think theologically there's a kind of reason for that, and I think practically I think going to something where you're physically together enables you to engage so much better. So at the beginning of lockdown, I think I was chatting with Rebecca and we're saying, it's so much easier going to church. We don't have to travel there. We don't have to travel home. It only takes like an hour, that kind of thing. But then we realized actually the physical act of going somewhere and then being there means that you engage in a way which is, I think personally, a lot deeper and a lot more helpful for me than just kind of flicking open the computer and often being quite distracted by other things around the house at the same time.
Yeah, no, completely. And you've mentioned the incarnation. Jesus tabernacles with us. You go to a church, Latimer Minster, where they literally tabernacle, don't they? So you meet in a great tent already, normally, under normal conditions.
Yeah.
But at Latimer Minster, you're making some plans to move outdoors. What are the plans?
Yeah, so we're just really excited to think about what we can do. I think there's so many limitations, obviously, to meeting inside in terms of how many can meet, having to be masked and so on, that I think for a lot of people makes it quite frustrating. And we're blessed as a church to meet on a 70-acre fruit farm just between Gerrards Cross and Beaconsfield. And so the plan is from the beginning of September to go right through the winter for the next 6 months. We're going to meet outdoors. We've got a kind of a wooded area. So we're going to put up some sails in the trees to provide some covering if it rains. We're going to build fires. So we're calling the whole initiative Forest Fires. So people can gather in small clusters around each fire, basically put up a simple kind of stage with a kind of portable PA system in the middle. And then the idea is that people can come and gather. We're going to meet at midday, a fairly short kind of interactive 45 minutes gathering where we'll meet in small clusters to engage with the passage that we're going to be looking at that day, then have a time where we can be led in worship. Then there'll be about a 20-minute sermon, and then back into our little clusters to be able to discuss and pray together. And then the idea is we'll probably bring picnic lunches and stuff, and then just share lunch together afterwards. So the idea is that it's really simple, but the beauty is, of course, being outside. We're just not under the same restrictions as we'd have to be inside, and it means that we can grow numerically without the limitations of the physical space that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we've got 70 acres, but that's quite a long way out for you.
Yeah, but it's surprising. In different congregations, we've got a farmer in our congregation, so what could we do? We've got a beach down the road. What could we do? I was just speaking to Susie Leafe. They've got a rugby club just up the road. Why don't they? So in one sense, with a bit of creativity, we could all do something innovative like this. What have been some of the reactions as you've kind of made these plans known to other Christians in particular? What have people been saying?
Yeah, I think I would say the big reaction from most people has just been, that sounds great. Let's see what we can do. And so I've been chatting with a few other church leaders, just as you say, thinking about what kind of outdoor spaces could you find near you so that you could do something similar. So I think generally it's been really, really positive. I think a couple of the more critical comments have been, I guess the one that most people seem to come up with is, yeah, but what about the British weather? It might rain. And I'm like, no, it will rain. It definitely will rain between now and next March. I think obviously in normal life pre-COVID, if you had a choice of doing an open air service in the rain or meeting inside in the dry, you would meet inside. But if the choice is meeting inside in a very limited number, wearing masks and all the other restrictions, versus meeting outside in the rain, putting up an umbrella and taking the wellies, I think the reality is actually, in the current situation, most people are willing to rough it. And actually, my experience last weekend, I was preaching on the Saturday morning, the heavens opened, and people just put up their umbrellas.
That always happens when you preach, Michael. The heavens are always open to me when I hear you preach.
I'd love it if it happens
in the colloquial sense.
Yeah.
In the Noahic sense, not in the Ezekiel 1 sense. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's one reaction. I just think, yeah. Just take a coat, take umbrellas. I think some people are still a little bit cautious. So I've had a few people say, isn't it a bit risky? There's still risks to gathering together in that kind of way. And I think my response in that time is to say, well, like, nothing is ever without risk in life, but that doesn't, if you only do things because there is zero risk attached to it, we just wouldn't do anything. But two things to bear in mind is, number one, like, what is the risk physically? And in the current situation, actually, it's a lot less than many people often fear, given the current infection rates, given the precautions and stuff that we'd be taking. So it isn't as big as we worried, but also it's not the choice is not between do we take risks or do we not take risks. I think the choice is what kind of risks do we take. Yes, physically gathering may incur certain risks, but not physically gathering has other risks attached. And I think my concern as Christians is sometimes we only see the physical risks of, what if we get COVID? But I say actually there's a whole load of other risks, emotional, mental, spiritual, that are at stake if we don't meet together and we don't give Christians that opportunity to physically gather. And so to those who are risk averse, I would just say, actually, it's not a question of taking risks or not taking risks. It's just a question of what risks are we going to take and what areas are we willing to risk doing.
So maybe, that's really helpful. It's not do you be risky or not? Which risks? Okay, so paint a picture for us. It's quite a drastic move to take your services out of doors all throughout winter. You must see that there is quite a serious risk to the UK church right now. Can you put words to what that risk is and what the fear on that side of the equation looks like?
I think one of my, there's several fears. I think I fear that many people have just disengaged with church. I think we sometimes kid ourselves when we look at the Facebook views. And to give you an example of that, I was putting something on Facebook the other day. Brilliant, 250 people have watched this video, and then I played the video back and I realized the audio hadn't worked, so actually they couldn't have heard anything. So basically it was 250 people clicking on a video and then disengaging. So I think we can kid ourselves into thinking everyone's engaging, they're sitting there, and I think a lot of people haven't. They have dropped out, and I think, well, I have found it hard to engage with church online. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And so that's one real fear. I think we fear the risk, I'd rather say, is we risk giving the impression that basically like gathering together is not that important. And I think actually, like, biblically it is. Like, we're commanded to not give up meeting together, and so actually to not do everything within our capacity to make that possible gives the impression to Christians that actually it's a kind of negotiable, that's not really that important. And we want to say actually it is. And also I just think evangelistically, like, I just worry, like, there was a kind of time at the beginning of lockdown where everyone's saying, oh, it's great, everyone's kind of coming to church online. But I also, I guess I've been thinking particularly about young people over the summer, with the cancellation of so many youth camps. So many young people I know who came to faith through summer camps. I'm guessing that most of those non-Christians who would have come to faith through summer camps won't necessarily have engaged with an online camp in the same way, if at all. And I think one of my big concerns is for kind of those in the teenage kind of age brackets, who in every conversation I've had with people have just said actually they've really struggled to engage with church online. So providing something where they can physically gather, I think, is just so important.
And what an opportunity to put the positive to it. What an opportunity to be a public witness outside the four walls of a church and saying we're still here, we're singing in the rain. That in itself is quite a witness. Brilliant. Well, we wish you all the best with all of that, and we might catch up with you a little bit later on in the autumn and see how things are going at Latimer Minster. But Michael Lutz, thanks so much for joining us.
We're all in hospital with pneummonia.
Yeah, no COVID, just pneumonia.
Yeah.
God bless.
Cheers.
Great. What did you make of Michael Ott's Singing in the Rain?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, go hard or go home, isn't it? Kind of mentality, which I appreciate. So the idea of being in the great outdoors with fires burning, forest fires. That's a little bit insensitive as a name, but but no, I like the idea. Yeah, I mean, and I think I think to be applauded for doing, thinking outside the box and thinking, well, I think he's right in the danger of not gathering. Absolutely. And I think actually the things he said near the end there about just people disengaging, I think that's really the thing that I'm concerned about. So although I think we're all kind of agreeing that the same kind of concern. We've all got the same concern at the heart of this, but we perhaps are just thinking in different directions of what we do about that. So obviously, they're trying to combat that at least in one sense by making sure people can gather in the kind of Sunday gathering, so to speak, en masse. So yeah, I think it's a really positive thing. Yeah, I mean, I still do have the question. I know he said the critics say about when it rains. Rain I can cope with. I'm still thinking about Betty, who's 80, when it's -2. I got neighbours who won't leave the house after 5 o'clock because it's dark. Like in the winter. So,
but would Betty come anyway? And yeah, and is there an opportunity to do an afternoon tea for Betty?
Sure.
And I think with all this stuff, that horrible portmanteau that the fidgetal, the combination of physical and digital. I think that'll be one kind of hybridization we'll have to do. That we'll have to broadcast what we do for those who can't show up, and we'll have to get alongside those who are too sick to come, too old to come, too fearful to come, and I think what we don't want to do is to say, church is for the rough and ready types who they would climb Ben Nevis on a Saturday, so of course they'll do forest fires on a Sunday.
Sure, yeah.
So it's important to maintain that whole Isaiah 42. A smouldering wick he will not snuff out, a bruised reed he will not break, a smouldering wick he will not snuff out. What about the fearful ones? What about the frail ones? How do we also serve them? But why not have both? Let's try for both.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, we'd love to hear what you guys think at home. What is the hope for church in these strange times? As we're migrating from Zoom, what does it look like where you are on Sundays? And what is your great hope? Because let's live on a note of hope. Because even in John 15, Jesus talks about, I am the vine, my Father is the vine dresser, and there is pruning that happens to the vine. And I think we are noticing pruning happening, and it's painful. It's always painful, but the pruning happens that there might be more fruit. And we've always got to trust that God's purposes go through death and into resurrection, through Good Friday and into Easter Sunday. What have been your experiences? We'd love to hear from you of ways in which through COVID-19, through the lockdown, God has been bringing more fruitfulness. We'd love to hear stories of that, and we'll get back in touch with you in the next episode. But in the meantime, Paul, how can people catch up with us?
Yep, you can find us by looking for Speak Life UK on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. So all the major kind of social media outlets. And then you can always visit the website, speaklife.org.uk, and find out more info there and contact us if you need to as well.
Brilliant. And on the next episode, might you be in the flesh? Is that?
Yes, that's the plan. Next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Wow. So we'll be together in some sense.
Yeah, it'll be very anemic, but no singing. There'll be no singing.
Oh, I'm not coming then.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Take care. Goodbye.